Welcome to MMO Grinder's Sidequest, where I take a look at early open or closed betas, subscription trials, and simpler titles, giving you a quick first impression. Today I'll be looking at Orbus VR, which, as the name suggests, is a VR MMO. Before we all start worrying about being unable to log out and being forced to live for far too many seasons in a badly written shounen anime, Orbus has been around for a while, and that hasn't happened yet, at least starting out in an early access state in 2017 or so, then being reworked into Orbus VR Reborn in 2019, which I'm technically talking about today. If anyone's asking, I'm usually playing this on an Oculus Quest 2, but it's also available on Quest 1 and even Steam if you have any kind of PC VR headset. Graphically, this isn't anything to write home about. It's highly stylized, blocky models, but not like 90s VR blocky. There's just some simpler cell shading in a lot of the models and basic texturing, some of which will stand up to better scrutiny than others when getting in close. Whether it's just how VR works, or my jacked up eyes in general, I find that faraway models tend to look unpleasantly blurry, and I have to be in a pretty well-tuned headset adjustment in order to get through a decent play session without a splitting headache, or keeping my stomach from leaping out of my esophagus. Dramamine N is a godsend, by the way, but so is proper IPD adjustment. I'm surprised with the look of the visuals being basic medieval city or tree-spotted grasslands, that the enemies actually do take on a more unique design, with some odd runic-looking tree people and translucent aliens being among the creatures that I've encountered, all properly identifiable from a distance due to some vast design differences between their silhouettes. More important is the marking above the creature, as it identifies the creature's relative strength to yours. Basically, stick to gray triangles and yellow diamonds if you're solo. If you see a purple star, just run. Characters have a decent amount of creative variety despite their doll-like heads and floating torsos with Rayman hands. It's a pretty common and basic aesthetic for simpler VR games, and obviously a smart move for a VR MMO, where a constant and properly smooth frame rate is the difference between an immersive adventure and a vomit-stained carpet. There's also a decent trick done with draw distance, where players out of range are just shown as glowing blue lights, so you'll know that someone is there in the distance, but they won't take up any render resources until you could possibly interact with them. Music is basic, not terrible. Just like the graphics, it's not really trying to set itself apart too heavily, and it's fairly simplistic overall. Honestly, for some reason I'd keep thinking about Trove at times when I was listening to it, but listening to some of these tracks outside of the game, they're pretty complex and catchy, even if I hardly notice them while I'm in the game. Sound is also sticking with what seems like video gamey noises opposed to anything realistic. It's really hard to remind myself of a lot of this since all the footage that I recorded is silent, as if the game doesn't want to play its sound while streaming to OBS. That might be built on purpose, considering the whole thing runs on an open voice chat. One thing I always found hilarious about VR MMOs and popular media, well, basically anime, was that the game itself within those worlds usually wasn't very imaginative. I mean, for God's sake, Dot Hack's in-universe MMO, The World, was just a town hub with a portal that you entered random keywords into to send you to a randomly generated boring flat field containing a randomly generated dungeon hidden somewhere within it. A lot of the time the game seemed more like playing EverQuest with a TV strapped to your face, and I don't get how you'd even want to play it regularly. There's none of that proper interactivity that's usually represented by the in-universe world. VR and MMOs have come a long way since then, so I'm happy to say that Orbus, despite going fairly generic in a lot of ways, does properly implement VR through a variety of motions and gestures that easily help the immersion much further than MMO but it's first person. Besides, we already have ESO for that. For example, the classes are mostly the part and parcel stuff you would see in MMOs, warriors, archers, mages, paladins, shaman, and the like, but it's how each of these classes play out in this world that sets Orbus apart enough for me to even be talking about it on this Why Haven't You Figured Out I've Basically Retired This Yet show. Sure as hell won't be helping matters that I'm doing it now. Well, for one, the warrior isn't just a sword and board. You physically have to swing your sword and bring your shield out in order to attack and defend. Using different attacks and slashes in certain orders can cause effects on the enemy, like generating more aggro or stunning them, while the type of shield that you equip will affect your attack and defense for proper stances and tooling of party play. The archer needs to physically draw back on the bow and fire out arrows by aiming them at the enemy, making it entirely possible to miss instead of just relying on RNG to decide that for you. A neat feature of the archer lets critical red spots appear on the enemy that you can aim for to hit for bonus damage. Archers also have specialty arrows that they can equip to do things like add poison, rain down fire, or deal massive damage that you can physically remove from your belt and knock into your bow. You can remove a spiked explosive trap and toss it onto the ground ahead of you. You can also hold a fully drawn bow and charge it for a power shot that not only will deal much higher damage, but interrupt certain enemy casts, as well as add more powerful effects to your specialty arrows. Most to all of my footage and time in the game was spent playing as an archer. So despite the warrior footage, rest assured that the remaining classes all feature some interesting and occasionally complex mechanics to their tasks, including 2 gun classes, despite the fact that I didn't record any of those. Special mention goes to the Rune Mage, who literally draws runes in the air with their wand in order to cast their spells. Even though the game requests that you pick a starting class, you can very easily head to the Beginner's Weapon NPC and choose a new weapon to switch classes, as the game follows a Final Fantasy XIV style class mechanic. As such, your level is tied exclusively to that class and weapon type. The level of interactivity is also featured in gathering and crafting. You'll pull a pickaxe off your belt in order to mine and pick herbs by physically hitting them. The tinkering job will have you piecing together huge 3D puzzles. Alchemy will have you choosing a table full of ingredients to follow along with your recipes, and time the addition of adding more ingredients by the color of the liquid in the pot. Fishermen can craft lures by choosing up to 3 parts and placing them on a hook, while fishing is simple as casting out your lure and then as simple as casting the line out and waiting for a bite, then reeling in the catch without breaking the line. Have you noticed how hard it was to start that, though? This game's a bit on the buggy side. It's not just VR exclusive bugs, like getting caught on geometry or having NPCs not recognize your waving gestures, or the bowstring occasionally not catching when you go to pull it back, but a lot of the MMO classic bugs will pop up here too. Enemies get stuck in the wall and become unattackable and unkillable. Being stuck in a permanent combat state even after combat ends, unless you kill another enemy or end up relogging the game. Spawns are too excessive when you're traveling, but too slow when you need to kill them for a quest. Party members being more or less invisible to you unless somebody relogs. I wouldn't call it unplayable, but some of these are far more frustrating than others. Beyond the VR exclusive issues, it's nothing I've not seen or dealt with before, and occasionally I've dealt with far worse. The starting experience is a bit on the rough side. The game does its best to acclimate you into it, but it's not the best at navigating or explaining a lot of the finer nuances. You only get the most basic explanation of your class in pop-up menus, but you'll have to delve into your journal in order to really understand what you're capable of. And navigating that journal is a bit weird, as you physically have to flip through the pages by grabbing on the far left or far right side of it. On the occasion, you'll find new information in that journal, but the game doesn't really seem to note or mark exactly what pages are new, making me second guess what's actually been added. Luckily, or unluckily depending on what groups are near you at the time, the community is your best source of information. I will say that any game with an open mic that attracts this level of teenagers and actual children is probably going to have some very choice moments best not recorded on camera, but my overall experience has been pretty decent. The community is pretty helpful to newbies overall, helping to explain and even clear out some early quests. I was lucky enough to have a high-level player find and provide me with a lot of information about the game, as apparently word was getting around that I was streaming the game on Twitch. The fact the community decided to assist me instead of harass me for streaming the game is honestly a rarity in my time reviewing MMOs. I guess a niche within its own niche probably understands that you might want to keep whatever community you can get. I'm surprised this one is as active as it is. And it's a surprisingly diverse group playing, hearing all sorts of languages and voices ranging in every age. Parties are easy enough to form, the quest tagging is fairly open and usually granting credit to anybody dealing even a glancing blow. Monster XP, while more likely granted to the person who's done the most damage, is hardly the best way to level up anyway. That's better suited to quest turn-ins that follow Archage's rules of allowing you to turn them in at one of 3 ranks for greater rewards. Public events also make an appearance, and while the first one I found was a fairly uninteresting kill the things when they appear until the clock runs out, the event at the Chaos Portal has this really fun mechanic, which again takes full advantage of VR. Arrows will fly out from the portal and contain crystals. You're tasked with physically removing the crystals from those arrows and literally throwing them back through the portal, lest they spawn into some fairly tough alien creatures. It's my favorite quest in what little I've seen of the game. The aforementioned player who gave me a tour of the game also took me through a dungeon, which was quite mechanically sound, and even had some fun VR-only concepts, like having to physically look away from an enemy attack in order to avoid taking damage from it. Of course, being in a fully 3D space in first person, navigating a good group formation can be tough and tricky, and far more so when other players will tend to block ranged player shots. I cannot count the number of times I've been sighting in on an enemy, only to have another party member run immediately in front of me as I loosed my arrow. Of course, when I would set up a position where they would end up behind me, I'd end up blocking their shot and then get immediately called out, despite that being something that they had done to me on several occasions prior. PvP is a purely opt-in system, and while World PvP seems to be rife for gankers, the Battlegrounds, as I've been told, scale everyone to the same level and allow for actual skill-based combat. Not that I would know firsthand, as every attempt I had to queue up never worked out, and the one and only time my queue actually came up, the classic "not everyone checked in as ready" message followed afterward and kept me stuck in the queue again. Guilds also seem to be a pretty simple affair to set up, but considering the only members of Grindstone with a VR headset are Marco and myself, I wouldn't expect me to place any sort of real presence in the game at the moment. Since the title is a buy-to-play sort of situation, there is no subscription option. Normally retails for $20, which is pretty solid, but it's not as uncommon to see it on sale in the Oculus shop. Probably Steam too. Cosmetics of different variety are sold in the shop, as well as a DLC storyline quest. There is still plenty of content without worrying about that DLC, so it's not imperative that you nab it immediately upon your first playing, but it's there when you may want it. Honestly, I've been enjoying this, when I can. VR in general isn't something I spend hours in, and even a decent amount of time in the game has me retraining my eyes to see normally for at least 30 minutes. So I can't exactly pull constant multi-hour sessions even if the battery power in my headset would let me. I still get a lot of cravings to jump back in and get further into it. I'd love to see more of this game, so hopefully I can make trips a semi-regular thing. I really wouldn't expect anything beyond more streams of this from me, even if there is plenty more to talk about. At least, don't expect anything for a long while. That show is pretty much over, even if VR found a way to make the genre at least somewhat interesting to me again. This has been an MMO Grinder Sidequest, and it's time I logged out.